hello. It's so good to virtually meet you.
You too.
The thing I wanted to start with was high school. So I was doing my due diligence heading into this and just reading different interviews with you. And one that really stuck out to me was you had talked about having some body image issues in high school and it led to kind of an unhealthy relationship with food. And um, I really related to the body image stuff because I first started viewing my body in a different way in high school. And I remember the specific point where the switch flipped in my brain where I started viewing myself in a negative light and started viewing my body and my disability in a negative light. And it was a kid. I was new at this public school. I wasn't fitting in. And this kid invited me over to sit with him and his friends at lunch. And I was like, oh, cool. Someone is actually talking to me. And he was asking what I do. And I said, I act. And he was like, well, what have you been in? And I had done a co-star thing on a Nickelodeon show. So I was telling him that. And his friends kind of started laughing. And he was like, I didn't know they let cripples on that show. I'm curious for you, do you remember the moment or the sequence of events that kind of led to you viewing yourself and your body in a negative light?
Yeah. I'm so
We're
sorry.
starting with the heavy stuff, by the way.
That's
So
fine. No, who has time for small talk?
yeah,
I'm so sorry first that happened. That's just breaks my heart because, but that's kids in high school and figuring out who you are in the world. And, thankfully there's so many opportunities later to start over, hopefully, that you can take.
yeah,
And understand that, you know, other people's behavior is not your fault or, really says more about them than you. But for me, so I had an eating disorder, when I was about 16-ish till probably about 19, 20. And the reason I give it that time frame is because I think when it initially began because I started gaining some weight, hormones, teenage girl, body changing, and my first boyfriend broke up with me. And it felt like things were out of control for the first time. And it was also around the time that my friends were talking about dieting and calories and reading the backs of packages and things I'd never done before. And this new part of my personality got unlocked where I needed to control. And because that made me feel safe, no matter what the consequences or results were. And so I was able to control my calories and how much I ate. And I lost 40 pounds
wow,
in a year. And I was very thin and not well. And I knew it. I didn't like how I looked. It wasn't that I wanted to be that skinny, but I was so afraid of letting go of that control.
mm-hmm.
I then gained a lot of weight and then finally figured out, and I fluctuated as anybody does, but I did that on the first couple of seasons of Sopranos. So I got the same teasing you got for my weight then by fans. Even live, I remember I was live on a radio show one time and somebody called and commented on my weight gain and fluctuation and whatever. And I was definitely young and fragile and it was hard for me to deal with. But right as I got over all of that, I got diagnosed with MS. So my relationship with my body has been an interesting one, to say the least. I, unlike you, my limp came slowly later in life. And so I am only just now figuring out how to be comfortable in this body. It's been so many years of fighting it and fighting it not getting to this point. And hiding it. And I'm just in the past 2 years really playing with, because I have to kind of fake it till I make it. the idea that I am okay with this, the acceptance around it,
Yeah.
and kind of almost appreciating and loving my body for what it can do, and how hard it's pushing and working despite the odds against it.
Yeah. There's so much to unpack there, and
I
I
know. Sorry, I went on for a
no,
second.
no,
Thank
I love it. I love it. It actually goes into like several other questions that I have. So, I want to go back and also say I'm really sorry that you had to deal with that and deal with people commenting on your body and teasing. And it's something that this industry, it's so weird how it's like there's people kind of feel like they have a right to our bodies and to say what they think about them, and they don't really consider the consequences of all of that. And even on, like on the show I'm on, there's different castmates and stuff that have had stuff like that online. I've had things online of people making comments on a picture, or like, oh, is so and so pregnant, or things like that. And it's like it's really frustrating
you.
having to deal with all of that. So I'm sorry that you had to deal with that as well. Before we go, because I really want to dig into like your diagnosis and how kind of things have changed for you since then. But before, I wanted to go back to Sopranos and just quickly, like, what was the process of booking that? And I read that kind of helped pull you out of the eating disorder.
So this was I had gotten the Sopranos prior to the eating disorder, like a couple of months before.
Okay.
Um, that was like, I mean, I was doing community theater on Long Island. I had done one national tour of a musical and one summer stock performance, but it was like really, I went to public school in Long Island. It was still this like dream of mine, but my parents weren't quite sure like how real this was for me. I had an agent and a manager. I was primarily auditioning for Broadway musicals. But being 16 at the time, there weren't a lot of roles for teenagers in musicals, especially back then. So I had decided that summer I was going to be like all my friends and go to sleepaway camp finally. And right before I was leaving for sleepaway camp, my manager called and was like, there's this new show on HBO, and HBO really wasn't necessarily a network for television shows. And it's called Sopranos. Maybe it's musical. There were very few details about it, but they're casting looking for a 16-year-old Italian looking girl. And I figured, oh, I can pass for Italian. And I just like didn't think anything of it. I went to Georgianne Walken and Sheila Jaffe's office on the Upper East Side, and there was a scene about a girl fighting with her mom about wanting to go on a ski trip. I knew what that was like. And I had a pretty thick Long Island accent, which I think gave me my leg up, to be honest, in that audition. Like it was real, it was raw, it was there. And it was over the course of a week and a half that I got the part. I was called back the next day to read with David Chase, called back the next day to read with all the producers. And then the following week, I was at HBO offices screen testing.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was, I mean, in like no process I had ever been a part of before. I had never come close to anything like that before. It felt very surreal. So then after shooting the show, and then after seeing myself on camera, and then also going through this heartbreak, that's definitely what ignited my eating disorder. But then, so there was almost a full year between filming the pilot and the starting to film the first season. So there was a lot of time. And at that point, I had gained 5 pounds, and in my head, I'm like, oh, I'm back. No one's going to notice anything. And they were like, this is a completely different human. What's going on? And so I was told that I needed to start eating and gaining weight, and this was, not something that they were like happy about, and they were concerned for me. And maybe this isn't like, they were holding auditions for other girls, like while we were starting to shoot. They lessened my role for the first few episodes, I think, and just sort of trying to figure out what to do. And I think my work ethic and my energy and my like showing up and showing that I cared about the show and that I was going to be okay was enough reassurance for them, I guess, to keep me on. But that was like the whole first season. And then so when the second season started airing, and yes, I had gained a lot of weight, in my head, I thought it was going to be like it was happening in my personal life, where people were so happy to see me healthy. And they were like, nobody said a word if I gained weight on the show. They didn't care. And so that's why it was so shocking when all of a sudden, I was so young and naive and new to this. I would go on message boards and read like what people had to say about Meadow, and seeing them be just only talking about my weight and what I look like. That was probably the first and last time I've ever Googled myself or looked up what people have to say about me. I've never done it since, because I'm never going to find anything good. I could find a few good things, but if I see one mean thing, that's what I'm going to remember. I'm too sensitive.
Yeah. I'm the exact same way, but I found myself getting into arguments with people online too. Because after that scene that I had sent you,
Yes.
when that scene came out, it was like a flood of really beautiful messages, specifically people with disabilities or who have kids with disabilities, and it was really moving, and that played a big part in my own healing and um, self acceptance. But there were some, especially like specifically because it's the content of the show that I'm on is religious.
Mhm.
There is a whole school of thought that you like you should be healed if you have enough faith or if you've prayed hard enough or whatever. And I've had fans come up. I was in New York actually in the airport for a layover, and I had this young couple come up, and they were really sweet, and they were like, "Can we get a picture?" And then they asked about that scene, and they asked what I thought about it, and I was like, I told them that it like helped me learn to accept myself a little more, and um, it gave me the healing that I actually needed, which it wasn't physical, it was more internal, and I gave them this long answer, and I could tell they weren't happy with it, with my answer or with the scene. So they put their hands on me in the middle of the terminal and started praying over me to be healed. And they were asking like, do you feel your legs straightening out? Do you feel your back straightening out? And things like that. And it was super. I didn't know how to respond there. I was just like, I feel great. Thanks. Nice
Yeah.
meeting you.
Yeah.
Um, but after that, I was like, I kind of, sometimes I can get into it, get a little heated, but now I almost feel like a responsibility to call out people that are commenting stuff like that, just because I don't want someone else who isn't at that stage in their own personal healing or journey to read those and feel like they're not good enough or they're not worthy or whatever because they haven't been healed. Um, but
Ugh.
it's weird reading comments about you or people assuming certain things about you, and yeah, it's not fun. So I don't blame you.
Well, because it's also layering on a whole inner dialogue that you're fighting with as just a human being, right? We're all dealing with an inner voice that's constantly telling us we're not enough.
Yeah,
And so like to be able to put yourself out there, like I don't need any, yeah, I know I gained weight. Thank you. Like I don't need you to point this out for me. And I can say this so freely to other people, especially other people with disabilities. And it's been the hardest for me to receive and hear myself. But like, people need to understand there's nothing wrong with them. Like this world is not necessarily, this world is built for people that can climb stairs and walk and run. And that's making us feel like something's wrong with us.
yeah,
And, I've have such different perspectives from different times in my life as like a very able-bodied person that was very active. I was dancing on Broadway, and then 10 years later, people were like, what's wrong with your walking? What are you doing? What's wrong? And for many years, I lied about it. I had a back issue. It was an ankle issue. I'll never forget. I was shooting this pilot and I was the lead of the pilot. I was playing a detective. And no one had ever said anything to me. Like I knew I was physically struggling, but I would use my mind and cover it up because nobody had ever said anything. And after my first day of work, I'll never forget, the director was like, "Are you limping?" And it was like as if my deepest, darkest secret was found out. It was the most like pain. I didn't, and I was, no, 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 I'm fine. I'm fine. And as the days went on, like more producers like, "There's someone, I'm noticing this." And I'll never forget, there was this really sweet man who played one of like the police officers. And there was this scene where they're like, "I need you to go a little faster. I need you to run a little bit up there." And it's almost like he felt the panic in me. And he looked at me and he's like, "I'm going to put my hand in the back of your vest because you're covered by enough people, and I'm going to pick you up. And you're going to just let me like carry you." And I swear to God, he was just a guardian angel for me in that moment, because I was just like, I don't know I'm going to break down. I don't know how to do this. And that was the beginning of many years of me performing, just trying to get through the day without being found out. It had nothing to do with the work. There was no joy. There was nothing. There was just, how long can I keep this up before anybody knows? I mean, I didn't even tell my representatives. And it wasn't until probably 2 or 3 years later that I remember the first person I told was my manager at that time. And he was so lovely and supportive. And he was just, more than anything, he was like, "I'm so sorry that you feel like you had to go through this on your own." And then I told my agent, then I, told some friends. And it took me time to realize that I was loved and viewed the same way, whether I had a disability or not. And that MS didn't take away from me and my value as a human being. It was still a very scary moment to come out publicly about it. I think more than anything, just because of this job,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, it's
And
viewed as a liability so often.
yeah,
And
people don't know what to do with it.
no, no. And it's, I started acting when I was 6, and my first role, ironically, was Tiny Tim, with the little crutch and everything. And I uh, fell in love with it. And I mostly did community theater. And I've always been very active. Like I play football on every set I'm on. I have a football. It's like my security blanket. It just looks a little different when I run or when I walk. And I can't tie my right shoe because I have metal in my back and in my hip. So I have to have my friends or my wife do it. And it's it's just different. And growing up and like around that time, the kids in high school started making fun of me. I was spending a lot more time in LA and auditioning a lot. And I was having my reps at the time tell me things like, do your best to cover up the limp. I was having casting directors ask me if I could tone the limp down or lose the limp.
Oh my God.
Um, and I was replaced from a national commercial because the limp was too noticeable. It was all this stuff where I was just like, it felt like I couldn't win. And I totally relate to what you're saying of like, there was no joy in it. It was like, I couldn't be present. I couldn't service the character, the material, because I was just constantly thinking like, okay, like right foot, left foot, like don't limp. You have to keep your foot. My right foot kind of turns in a little bit. So it's like, keep it straight. And I like going into casting offices, my, my heart would just sink whenever I would notice the casting director look down, when I would walk into the room. So before I even start the audition, I saw that they clocked I have a limp, and I'm like, I'm not getting this part anyway.
Oh
Uh,
my God. You're speaking, that's my voice in my head.
yeah,
So much.
it's horrible. So I thank you for sharing that, because I was feeling emotional and getting choked up just hearing you say it because
Oh no, I would literally hold my breath
yeah,
walking in, being like, "Walk straight, walk straight, walk straight." It was literally like, could I get by without them? Even once people knew I had MS, it was like, but I don't want them to show it's that bad. You know what I mean? I did a job over the pre-strike for 2 years on this wonderful show called Big Sky, and they had hired me as a guest star, and then kept me on and made me a regular. And that experience was the first time where I was like, "Oh, I'm not a burden. Whoa, maybe I do have a little bit of talent." And maybe it people are okay and real. It was just it was an opportunity for me to understand, like, this didn't matter. Nobody ever brought it up to me. Nobody ever expressed any frustration. It was more of like, how do we make this easy for you, Jamie? To the point where the first ADs would have the talk with a new director if they hadn't worked on the show before, prior to me getting the set. So I didn't even have to have those conversations and be like, this is what I can do. This is what I can't do. It was laid out for me. And I'm so grateful to everybody that worked on that show. But as soon as it was done and I found out it was canceled, I just made this promise to myself, like, I'm done hiding it.
Yeah.
If I am robbing myself of my full potential, I have to play it in the body that I'm given. I have to be able to move the way I move. Like, I can't be concerned about playing somebody that I can never be. I can't be an able-bodied person right now. Maybe one day there will be a miracle, maybe. But until then, like, I have to be okay with this body, and everybody that I'm working with has to be okay with this body, because I promise you, I'm going to give 100 times better of a performance if you just let me do this in this body. And I haven't had that opportunity yet, but I can't wait for it. I really can't, because I feel like I'm just going to have a moment where I'm like, oh, this is what I've always wanted to do. This is what I used to do. This is what it used to feel like, because it's just felt extra hard. And I also know that I'm doing an incredible disservice to myself and other people like me to show, like, my own manager even told me recently, he was like, Jamie, you don't have to play a person with a disability, but if you go in and you get a role, bringing in that disability, whether they talk about it or not, will only enrich it. And it's just being there is representation, because the truth of the matter is, in my day-to-day life, 95% of my life, I don't talk about MS.
Yeah.
I don't talk. Everybody around me knows how I move. Everybody help. I have help when I need. I know how to ask for help. I know how to know when I need to push forward and keep trying. I'm just, it's not a handicap. It's not a disability. I am a mom. I do it all. It's hard sometimes. Do I wish sometimes that I didn't have this and understand things could be a little bit easier? Yeah, but I can't waste my time sitting in that anymore. I've done that for too long. Like, I've even gotten to a point, and I'm sure you've felt this at times too, like, I have a lot of gratitude for it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to shift my mindset where, especially in acting, right? Where you're like, you really wanted a role or you really wanted something to go your way. What if you're being spared? Like, what if this is something that's like for you? And I don't want to know who I would have been without this. I really don't. I can't imagine having some of the most deep, meaningful, incredible connections with people had I not have been having this experience in this life. And yeah, I am in this stage of it where I'm just having a lot of gratitude.
That's really beautiful. And I recently have kind of found that same gratitude. I think it's taken me a long time. And you mentioned earlier, you're kind of now entering this phase where you're kind of figuring out what it means to accept, these circumstances and this body that you've been given and all of this stuff. And it's so complicated, but I feel like I've been at a place where, since the show I'm on, like, originally the character wasn't written as having a disability. They changed the character once I was cast and made it part of the story, which was terrifying, but ended up being this huge blessing because it forced me to own it and to just, like, to lean on, like, for the first time ever, I was able to act without, like, and just walk as myself and not think about walking quote unquote normal. And it was so freeing. And that kind of led to this level of self acceptance. But now I feel like I'm starting to move towards not just acceptance, but embracing it,
Mm.
and being proud of it. And I truly, the director of our show asked me, whenever they decided to make that part of my character, he was like, "If you could be healed in real life, would you?" And I said no at the time. This was like 2 or 3 years ago. I was like, "No, I'm perfectly happy with how I am." I was lying. I for sure would have wanted to be healed then. Um, but now for the first time, I was thinking back on that, and over this past year, I'm like, I truly don't think I would. Like, my kids love me the way I am. They love the way I walk. It's allowed me to, and taught me so much empathy, and patience, and to try to teach that to my kids. And um it's just been such a beautiful tool and gift, honestly, because I, like you said, I don't know who I would be if I didn't have that, if I didn't experience all of the hardships and the heartbreak, but also the meaningful connections you have with people. And um you see who people really are, and they, like my friends on the show that I'm on, much like on Big Sky, they're all so accepting, and none of them think twice about it. Like, they know, they can tell if my knee is hurting or my hip is hurting, and they'll check in, and they're there for me. But it's not like, it's just this, they accept me as I am. It doesn't mean anything to them. And I'm really glad that we're both on that journey of being able to see that. Like, I think my next step is seeing fit, like, internally, I'm finally starting to see the beauty in my circumstances and in my disability. I'm still working on seeing the beauty in myself physically, like, after all those years. Um, but I'm definitely on that path, and it feels good. It feels.
Happy for you. I think
Thank
that's
you.
great. I mean, self acceptance is hard in general.
Yeah.
I think that's what really hit one of the things that hit me so much from that clip that you sent me from the show. Such a beautiful scene and so beautifully acted. But, like, when you said, like, what if true healing is like loving yourself in spite of what you're dealing with? Like, the ability to be able to do that. I mean, that's healing that can move mountains,
Yeah.
And I just, it's not easy until it is, like, until that switch goes off. And I'm working my ass off to get there. I really am.
Same.
And I'm so blessed to have kids too that really love me the way I am, although they're different. My 10-year-old son is the most empathetic, sweet to me, especially. Like, I've apologized, like, I'm sorry I can't play the mother son kickball, or I'm sorry that, I can't. And he was like, Mom, you're perfect. Like, you're my favorite mom. Couldn't ask for anything more, is literally what he said to me once. My 5-year-old is very upset about it. He is upset that his mom is slow. He's upset that mommy can't run. Like, he's still making sense of it. Like, he one day out of nowhere was like, you're the only one of the moms in my class that walks slow. And I said, okay. And he's like, you can't run. And my friends, I've seen all of their moms run. I'm like, I am so sorry. Like, I get that. I get that that makes you unhappy. It makes me sad too. I wish I could do that. And I don't try to cover it up, but mommy can do this, but mommy, he's been a wonderful teacher to me, and just also allowing for uncomfortable feelings, because I used to think that I needed to push those bad feelings away, and no, I'm not going to feel it. Nope, we're going to be grateful, or nope, we're going to focus on what you can do and not what just you can. And I think that those are all things and exercises that are important, but it's just as important to sit in shit. And
Yeah.
I, in this past year, have really given myself the space and time to grieve.
Yeah.
last year, 2023 was literally a year of grieving for me. Fortunately, I had the strike on my side, but it was a hard year, but a transformative one. I'm surrounded by wonderful friends that have held space for me to scream, cry, to the point where they were like hands open, being like, yes, give it to me, Jamie. We have been dying for you to complain. Like, we have been waiting for you to be like, this sucks. Because I never wanted to be the downer. I never wanted to be the burden. I come into a room already feeling lame. Like, I come into the room already feeling like, what the fuck am I contributing? You know what I mean? Like, when all the girls are like, I'll help do this and I'll help do that. And I'm like, I feel so inadequate. I just feel so incapable. And, it's taken time also for my friends to understand, like, I know this looks hard for me, but you got to let me do it. You know what I mean? But I think that them allowing me the space to express myself takes like an awkwardness out of the room, because they don't know what I'm feeling. They have their assumptions. And so also, what I think MS has done for me has made me a very vulnerable and very honest person. Before, I was, like I said, or the eating disorder was control. I mean, it's like perfection, never let them see you sweat. I mean, I come from an immigrant mom who like survived the depression and being a refugee. Like, she's like, you never say anything's wrong. You come in and say, I can do the job. And so that's what I was bred to do. And then give me a disability that I'm having to cover up. It was a real, test, and like, talk about breaking like generational like trauma, you know what I mean? But I also see it as the gift and the purpose, and like, not to sound like obnoxious, but I was probably the only one to do it.
Hmm.
Like, I was the one in my family where maybe God was like, I'm going to give you this, and you're going to stop this shit, and you're going to overcome it in whatever ways that means. And that goes back to kind of like, I don't really want to know what my life would have been like without this.
My grandpa, he passed away 2018. And he was like my hero. I grew up watching old movies with him, and that's like, I fell in love with acting because of those old movies. And he ended up getting basically a form of Lou Gehrig's disease when I was like 6 or 7. And they gave him like 5 to 10 years. And he was a doctor. He was like running a hospital, so he kind of knew what to do to prolong it as much as possible. Every day he would get up and ride his exercise bike. He would get himself dressed. He did everything on his own that he possibly could. And like, even like, as long as he could walk, he did it. Like, he would have a walker, and it would take him to go 10 feet. It would take him probably 10 minutes, because he would just move the walker like a few inches, and then just kind of drag his feet a few inches to catch up with it. And he did that without complaining for years. He ended up living over 20 years with it. And it was so frustrating for me to watch, seeing this, like, the most loving, patient person I've ever known going through this. But now looking back, I'm like, it taught me so much, um, within my own struggle, seeing the way he handled it, and how he was just so grateful for, this life that he had been given. And um, he kind of taught me to kind of look at the positives in any given circumstance. And it's one of those things where it's like, sometimes people, the right person is given this challenge, and I think he was a person that could handle it. And in him having that challenge, he taught me and the rest of my family so much, and was such a influence and role model to us. And I have no doubt you're doing that for your family and the people in your circle as well. um I think that it's a shitty hand sometimes, but that we've been dealt. But I'm
Ours is on
grateful.
the outside. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Everybody has a shitty hand in a way. Like, everyone
Yes.
their shit. And yeah, it could suck sometimes that ours is on the outside, but it's also kind of great because it's there to talk about. There's nothing we can do. And if anything, I don't know if you feel, but I feel like everybody wants to talk to me about their problems. Like
Yes.
everybody's like, you'll get it. And that's what I mean. Like the deep, beautiful connections that I've been able to have with people that I barely know,
Yeah.
that maybe we wouldn't have had otherwise. I had a conversation recently with, a cast member from Sopranos, and we were talking about what her perception of me was during that time. I was interested, and she was like, "You were really closed off. Like you were sweet and you were together, but like you were not open to getting to know in a deeper level, even though that's all I desperately wanted from everybody." And I'm like, "Yeah, that tracks." And now I'm like the complete opposite. But you know what I also feel like is a lot of my work right now is that balance of full acceptance and that nothing is wrong with me. But with a disease like MS, right? Like there's a lot of people that can tell you, well, if you do these exercises every day and you be patient and you do this diet and you do this thing, like a lot of healing could be possible. And because of that, I have a lot of really well intentioned, loving people, including my husband, that are constantly like, he'll see me have a day where I'm struggling physically. And as somebody who loves me and just wants to fix things, the next thing I know, there's all these printouts about this doctor. Maybe we should contact this person or this. And I appreciate the efforts, and I'm not to say that they're not right and maybe they could help me, but all it makes me feel is that like something's wrong with me. And
Yeah.
so it's that's what a lot of my work is right now, is like, where's this balance of accepting, okay, this is what I have and this is the body that I have and this is how I'm going to move through the world, but then also like, but if you do this, it could change it and make it better. So I that's kind of like my challenge right now is trying to figure out sort of that dance in between, because I'm seeing this amazing physical therapist right now. And she's like, Jamie, if you do these exercises 6 days a week for the next 6 months to a year, I promise you your walking will be improved. And there's almost like this self-saboteur in me, I think, that it's like, well, I'm probably only going to do it 4 then, because I'm so scared that if I did the 6 days a week for the 6 months and it didn't improve, like, you find out a lot of things about yourself and like your personality and your patterns during this. But my grieving year this past year was a lot of me tuning all of the healing out,
Hmm.
because I needed to really be okay with this possibly never getting better,
Yeah.
ever changing.
And that's, yeah, it's a hard thing to, I've struggled with a little bit of that as well. With mine, I've had a lot of corrective surgeries. I had a full spinal fusion, and when I was 8, and a bunch of other surgeries, and I'm probably gonna have to get a knee replacement soon. Hopefully, it's my last major surgery, but it's still something that like there's always some. As soon as one thing is fixed, there's another thing that's hurting, and it'll always. I've kind of had to try to figure out a way to accept that too, where it's like I'm always probably going to be hurting a little bit more than most other, like most able-bodied people. And thankfully it's something that's where I am grateful that I've had it my whole life, where it's like I don't know anything different. But it's I went to our writers after we did that scene, and I was like, just part of it was selfishly as an actor. I was like, I don't want my character's arc to kind of end there, and then I'm just, lost in the background in the final few seasons. So I was like, how can I keep it like juicy? How can I keep this storyline going? But also just something that I think would resonate not just with myself, but with a lot of other people, was I asked them, I was like, what, we know he has his answer. He's not getting healed in this lifetime. But what if moving forward, he gets worse? Like he now, like he has he knows that he has a place. He's kind of found his purpose within the group, but what if his body just continues to weaken and deteriorate? Because it's true, like sometimes people, not only do they not get healed, sometimes we get worse. And it's trying to wrestle with that and find it's like you're constantly, it's not just a matter of like, oh cool, I accept my disability and then that's it, because it's constantly changing and evolving. And um it's a never ending journey.
Yeah.
um but I wanted to ask really quick about when you were diagnosed. I'm just curious because since I've always had this, so like I've known from a very young age like what cerebral palsy is and what scoliosis is and why I am the way that I am. But with you being an able-bodied person that then was diagnosed with MS, what was your perception of like what MS was before, and how did that change? Like, what were the main things that you learned during your diagnosis where you were like, "Oh my god, like I had no idea."
I knew nothing about it before. Um, and I continued to purposely, right or wrong, I don't know, not know anything about it other than my own experience. I was in denial for a long time. I mean, I was 20 years old. It was, and being told to keep it a secret. And went pretty like symptom free for 5 or 6 years,
Mhm.
with the exception of when they were like, when I went through a really bad divorce. There were definitely symptoms that were flaring up, but nothing that anybody could see, or, you know, nothing that I couldn't handle. It was a slow progression of, um, of the symptoms. So I really lived in a state of denial for a really, really long time and didn't know anything about the disease, like I said, except my own experience. And only until I became public about it did I really learn more about MS and how it affects other people, and kind of was more interested in that, because I think that I was scared. I was scared to know more. I was scared to know what was possible. It was easier for me to just kind of go through and live just day to day, which again, maybe like was better for me at the time. But even with all of the information I know now, I actually had this really awesome doctor's appointment about a week or two ago. I went to see my neurologist. I have to see him like yearly and do the MRIs and everything like that. And it was a good MRI, no changes. And when he does his neurological tests, I'm actually testing stronger, even though my walking isn't better. He said to me, he was like, Jamie, I just want to commend you for how hard you fight this. It's not for nothing. Like, you are strong, you are really healthy. He's like, but your issue is a wiring issue. The wires from your brain to certain muscles in your right leg are just not there, or are weak.
We have the same weak leg.
The right one?
Yeah.
And he was like, leave the rest to me and all the other people that are devoting our life to science and trying to figure out how we can make it better. And I want you to just take that off your plate and understand there is nothing that you have done or not done that can change that. And it was really important for me to hear. I literally, when I walked out of that office, my husband was like, you have changed. Like, your entire vibe has changed, because it was like, I'm off the hook. Like, it's not all my responsibility to heal this thing. You know what I mean? Like, I can just do what I can, but also live my life. I don't have to have my entire life revolve around this. All my thoughts revolve around this. And it just, I don't know, that simple conversation was an absolute game changer for me, because I think it's important for us to realize that, also there's other people that are working very hard, but that just also, like, you're doing a good job. And this is just kind of is what it is. And stop thinking that it should or could be different if you made different choices.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's something that kind of like what you were saying earlier. It's if you devoted all of your time to trying to fix yourself or get better, it's like you're missing out on so much, and it's possible to live a full, fulfilling, like happy life with a disability, and that your whole life doesn't have to be dedicated to trying to get rid of it or fix it or whatever. Um, and that actually kind of leads me to the last main question, which is like, with, having a platform, whether or not you've asked for it, now that you have been diagnosed with MS and you have this following, you kind of like become this spokesperson. It's never what I think we envision for ourselves, but you we've become like these spokespeople for not just our specific disabilities, but the disabled community in general, or actors with disabilities, like all of these different groups that kind of then are looking for some sort of like hope or guidance, or just to feel like they're not alone in their own struggle. So has that ever, like, how have you embraced that new role, and since kind of going public and being more open than ever about it, and have did you ever feel like pressure, or intimidated by that role?
I've never felt pressure or intimidated. I've always felt like it was on my terms, um, because I made it that way. I don't feel like I owe anybody anything. I do see the privilege that I have in the platform that I do. I only share when I feel inspired to. And I only share when I feel like this is something that probably only another person with this unique experience will get. And I have found it to be difficult, or I have found it to be inspiring, or I have found this to be helpful. And that's when I'll share. And I, it's also allowed me to be more honest, like in general, about everything, because seeing that I am accepted and seeing that there's this community that is like, me too, girl, thank you. Like, that helps me too. It helps me to know that I'm not alone. It helps me to know that when I'm just going to share my vulnerability right now, it is received and I am not alone. I think it's helped me more than anyone maybe I have helped. And I am like I said, I'm figuring it out, and I have this little platform to figure it out on. And my intention is to bring it into my work, and hopefully, just as I grow and as I learn and as I accept, you're going to be right along that ride with me. I'm not sharing every day, but in the moments that I do share, I feel like I share enough that you know what I've been going through. Because I don't want it to feel like it's my job. And I don't want it to feel like it's my purpose, to be quite honest. I don't think my purpose is to be a spokeswoman
Yeah.
for people that have MS. I don't know what my purpose is yet, but like I said, I will always share when I feel inspired. I will always respond. I will always be willing and open to. I go into everything always willing to have my mind change. So I always come in with just like a openness to life, and I will never feel like I have to be anything anymore. I've
Yeah.
spent a long part of my life that way, when I was able-bodied and had the energy to do it. And now that I don't, like,
Yeah.
I don't, I owe nothing but to myself. In fact, I'm reading a book right now called Loyalty to Your Soul, because that's the
I'm
most
gonna write
important.
that down.
Oh, you got to read it. It's so good. I'm like halfway through. Um, yeah, loyalty to myself, and knowing that that's how I can share and help, is when I'm loyal to myself first. And so um, it is, like I said, an honor and a privilege to be able to help in any way just by being honest and vulnerable, but I don't feel pressure to do it.
Yeah, that's good. I
Yeah.
speaking of all of that, like, if you before I ask the final quick question that I end all of my interviews with, Um, I want to give you a chance to plug any like organizations you're working with or any projects you're working on, your podcast, any of that stuff.
Oh, yes, I have a podcast called Not Today, Pal, with my dear friend and co-star from The Sopranos, Robert Eiler. And you can check that out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
Sweet. Okay. So the final question that I end all of my podcasts with is, since we talk a lot about like insecurities or things that we've struggled with, I like to end on a positive note. So my question for you is, what is the thing that you love most about yourself?
The thing I love most about myself is I think I see the good in everybody. And sometimes it's gotten me in trouble, but I think I really see the good and innocence in everybody.
Yeah.
And I like that I see that. And I like that I do that.
Well, I want to say, even from afar, like before this conversation, that really comes across.
Aw,
Um, your love for people, and you just it's apparent that you have a huge heart, and even more apparent after having this conversation with you. So I have so much admiration for you, and have been a fan of yours for such a long time, and I'm just so glad and honored that you were willing to come on and have this conversation with me.
thank you so much. I am so happy to meet you and have this conversation. Thank you for inviting me on, and for doing what you're doing unapologetically and lovingly and with a lot of vulnerability and heart. And I can't wait to see the next season.